Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto returned after 3 years stronger than Jiraiya? Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. On this particular afternoon a lone figure was spotted sitting at the Hokage monument. The said figure in fact was sitting on the head of the Yondaime. One leg dangling of the edge swinging back and forth as if it was the fringe of the Yondaime blowing in the wind. The other leg propped up close to the figure's body in turn propping up his forearm on which the figure's head was resting on his open palm. His head was tilted slightly to the side with a faraway look on his face as he gazed down at the village where he once belonged to before he left. Such an expression on his face giving him the look of innocence if one was to look only on the surface. Once the wind blows his blonde hair aside and one was to look deep into his clear blue eyes one will see an intensity that comes with a lot of hardship, pain and emotional scarring. The figure looks down at head he was sitting on and lets out a sigh. It's been 3 years nay, Otu-san. Since I last saw you, said the figure chuckling in a sad manner. Though that time I didn't know. The figure shifted his gaze to the head on the right of the one he was sitting on. Nay, Oyaji, why didn't you tell me? I would have done anything to have known. I guess I can't blame you. You are dead, can't say anything and I'm sure you had your reasons. The figure then turned to look to his left and started laughing. Well, I have to pity the both of you. Not only the both of you are dead but you are stuck right next to Ba-chan's ugly mug, especially you, Otu-san, said the figure throwing his head back in hearty laughter. Rustling of leaves cut the figure's quiet time with the dead cages as other person made his appearance. The seated figure looked back to see a tall man with long bushy white hair appeared out of the vegetation into the clearing of the monument. Naruto, it's time to head into the village, said the tall man by the name of Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin. Naruto's face lit up and grinned at his sensei. Finally I get to see Ba-chan, Shizune Nekin, Sakura-chan and the rest of my friends again, said Naruto doing a little jump and punching his fist in the air in a display of joy and excitement. Jiraiya looked at his student in amusement. For all the changes he went through, be it physically or mentally, parts of him clung on like a leech. As the saying goes, the more things change the more remains the same. Naruto has definitely grown taller. From being the shortest guy in his class at the height of 1.45 meters tall to 1.6 meters tall, he was far from towering people but has grown considerably. His hair still continues to defy gravity, sticking out in unruly long blonde spikes, though it had the tendency droop down. For example, his fringe covering his eyes at times, especially when tying his forehead protector in haste as he did before arriving in Konoha. His face had lost his baby fat and had a more angular masculine look to it. The features on his face have sharpened, so had the whisker-like marks, giving him a feral look when his expression matched the intensity that was in his eyes. Despite the intensity, the clarity in his eyes has never left him, showing his determination, resolve and control. His taste in clothes had changed as well. He was involved in different environments and was exposed to a lot more things and situations. He has opted for wearing black baggy pants tapered right above his ankles by dark orange drawstrings held secure with a similar dark orange cloth belt, a weapon holster secured on his right thigh, dark brown sandals replacing his blue ones, and a black-fitting sleeveless round-collared shirt. As much as that did for his image, that isn't all. Currently he also donned a long dark blue baggy robe, open and untied, covering his body to his feet. At the back of the robe a bright orange spiral has been embroidered at the spot in between his shoulder blades, together with a katana and wakizashi forming a daisho tucked at the left side of his cloth belt and a pair of forearm protectors. He sported a look synonymous to the samurai of the daimyo of the Fire Country. Under all that clothing his body have matured to a small build still. However, it was lean and chiseled from the years he spent working with the ways of the sword. His current childish display of innocent joy, although unbecoming of his status as a ninja or a samurai, just goes to reinforce the fact of how much he has changed and how much he has remained the same. Hi. Let's hurry then. It's a long way down from here through the vegetation to the village, said Jiraiya. Hurry, you say, Aro Sennin, replied Naruto with a mischievous look on his face. Reaching into his weapon holster, he pulled out a queer-looking kunai and waved it at his sensei. Jiraiya's eyes widened at the sudden realization of what Naruto was about to do. Naruto, grinning at his sensei, threw the kunai past him. Right before Jiraiya could say anything to stop him, Naruto disappeared from his sight, leaving Jiraiya wanting to pull his white hair out in frustration. Arg! I'm going to get you for leaving me alone after coming here to accompany you back to the village. Jiraiya screamed. Taking a breath to calm himself down, he muttered to himself. Should have never taught that brat the principles of that jutsu. About 100 meters before the appearance of the gates of Konoha, Jiraiya finally caught up to Naruto. There he was, waiting patiently, leaning on a tree, his left leg bent with his foot planted on the trunk, arms tucked into his robe and his head leaning back, trying to blow his hair out of his face. Naruto, seeing his sensei has arrived, uses his foot to push himself into an upright position. Naruto then quickly fell in step with his sensei, heading towards Konoha's gates. Why are you so slow? Getting too old for this shit, Aro Sennin? Asked Naruto annoyingly as he grinned at his sensei walking side by side. Che. First thing this old man is going to do when we get back to the village is to persuade Tsunade to put up an announcement for Ichiraku to ban you from buying ramen, Jiraiya huffed in mock annoyance. Naruto gasped. You wouldn't. After that stunt you pulled, I am definitely tempted to. How dare you leave me up there alone? What if I was attacked by a mob of lusty, scantily clad women? There is no telling what they would do. With the last statement, Jiraiya's expression went from mock annoyance to perverted. Naruto could see him drooling, together with a slight nosebleed and a faraway look in his eyes. Che. Keep dreaming. Naruto retorted, sticking his nose up in the air, his turn sporting the look of mock annoyance. After 3 years of constantly being around his sensei, he has come to accept the perverted nature of the man. He used to be angry at how a person could be so degrading to women. However, after a certain incident, he has come to realize the fact that was how his sensei copes with his loneliness, and at the same time an extreme expression in his appreciation towards the opposite. Something suddenly hit Naruto in his mind. Talking about the opposite, Naruto thinking about Sakura, and that got him thinking of Sasuke and his promise to the girl. That immediately got him into a somber mood. Nay, sensei. Naruto started. Jiraiya's head snapped in Naruto's direction with speed, threatening to give him a neck ache for a couple of days. Naruto rarely called him sensei. Only when he was bothered and had difficulty discussing something serious. It's been 3 years already. Do you think we have enough time to? Naruto trails off as Jiraiya predicts he would be having a hard time vocalizing his thoughts. Jiraiya nods, understanding what his student is getting at. Don't worry. From what I know of the jutsu, we have sufficient time to sort him and the snake bastard out before he can claim what he perceives as to be his, stated Jiraiya. He sees Naruto's shoulders sag slightly. You know, even though I'm really excited about coming home, a part of me is dreading it, Naruto said hesitantly. Jiraiya nods once again. I understand. It's not that you don't want to come home, but you know coming home means the time to fulfilling your promise is near, and that means you will face off with Sasuke yet again. That is what you are dreading. As much as you two bicker, I know that you care for him like a brother, Jiraiya said quietly in a rare fatherly manner coming from him. Naruto just nods, not saying anything and keeping his eyes downcast. Look, we are here already, Jiraiya said, pointing to the gates just meters away from them. We'll take it step by step. Worry about it when you actually have to do it. We won't know how things will turn out. Getting their clearance from the guards and walking into the village, the duo have no idea how true what Jiraiya had just said. On this particular afternoon, one could also see another blonde, female this time, hunched over behind a desk scribbling away, almost covered from sight by stacks of paper. The Godime runs her fingers through her hair and lets out a sigh. People wouldn't think such a glamorous job such as being the Hokage would consist mainly of fights with paper, said Tsunade, putting down her pen and pushing herself back as she leans back on her chair. Chuckles could be heard from one of the two figures flanking her, assisting with the paperwork. On her right would be Shizune, fellow medic nin, personal assistant to Tsunade and a longtime friend. On her left would be Sakura, a promising apprentice already surpassing her expectations that she held for the girl. Already the young girl turning 16 is coming close to what Tsunade was in her prime, with added abilities in her arsenal which Tsunade didn't have in her time. Now Tsunade-sama, are you about to create another excuse for you shirk on your responsibility? Said Shizune, quirking an eyebrow at the Hokage. Tsunade crossed her arms, sticked her nose up in the air, snorting in indignance. What's wrong with taking a little break? Nothing unless the little break lasts almost the entire day, Hokage-sama, added Sakura, letting out a snicker. Tsunade glared at her apprentice. Sakura backed a bit, holding her hands up, however started giggling. Well, you do have a reputation of doing that, said Sakura, now hands covering her mouth, trying to stifle the giggle from exploding into outright laughter. Well, that is true, said Shizune, nodding in a sagely manner. Tsunade's already crossed arms tightened around her huge bosom and closed her eyes in a display of refusal to admit to their playful accusations. Che. Now both of you are ganging up on me, retorted Tsunade. Before any of the three could carry on with the conversation, a loud knock on the entrance on the office was heard. Come in, shouted Tsunade. Following the command, the door opened and the Chunin on desk duty entered. Hokage-sama, you have two visitors, saying they are old friends and family, said the Chunin, giving Tsunade a slight bow. Tsunade's eyes widened. Could it be? Tsunade trailed off. The Chunin gave a small knowing smile and nodded his head. It is as you have expected, Hokage-sama, replied the Chunin. Let them in, said Tsunade hurriedly, barely able to contain her excitement. The Chunin left, closing the door. Only a moment later the door reopened, admitting Jiraiya in, showing to Tsunade that he hasn't changed over the past 3 years. Jiraiya grinned at Tsunade and took a step to the side to show the person trailing behind him. Naruto took a couple of steps to the center of the room. With a flick of his hands he flared his robe apart further. In a swift practiced motion he bent to one knee, crossing his right arm to place his palm at the end of the hilt of his katana, his left hand close to a fist on the ground by his side and his head bent down low in an elaborate display of trust and respect towards the Hokage. I have returned, Hokage-sama, said Naruto solemnly. This fancy show definitely got the attention of the people in the room with various reactions. Jiraiya was chuckling as if he expected this. Tsunade was seated upright, stiff, with her face twitching in various places in an obvious attempt to contain whatever emotions that is running through her from showing. Sakura had her hands gripped on the table with her eyes wide open and mouth gaping in shock and disbelief. She kept switching glances between Naruto and Shizune, trying to get reassurance of the reality at hand. Shizune was scratching her head lightly with a look on her face which shows that she was unsure of what to make of this. As the twitching ceased, Tsunade stood up and walked around to the front of her desk. She narrowed her eyes and stared intensely at Jiraiya. When we agreed to allow you to leave with the brat to train him, I don't remember either of us mentioning turning him into a pompous samurai, Jiraiya, said Tsunade. Her eyes looked up in thought and she continued. though he was already pompous to begin with. Jiraiya couldn't help but guffaw at what Tsunade said. Sakura still looked like a fish out of water, however now the glances alternate between everyone in the room. Shizune was now scratching her head with both her hands, even more bewildered. Naruto still had his head down. However, it can be seen that his body is trembling slightly, trying to maintain being in character to the image that his was portraying at the moment. Bah! I come back showing that I have changed and matured, and the first thing that Baka Ba-chan does is to mock me. I'll show her pompous, thought Naruto in indignance. However, before Naruto could do anything to react, he felt a pair of arms wrap around and pulling him close gently into a very warm embrace. He felt a light pressure on top of his head, followed by a feeling of wetness on his scalp, shocking him into momentary paralysis. While Naruto was in his thoughts, Tsunade had bridged the short distance between them and got down on her knees to bring her to his level and enveloped him in an embrace while resting her head on top of his, shedding a few tears. "I missed you, Naruto," said Tsunade in a voice filled with deep tender emotions, followed by tightening her arms slightly, trying to get Naruto even closer to her. Jiraiya, seeing Tsunade showing the rare expression of her sisterly affections towards the young man, went to close the door behind them to give them some privacy. As the shock subsided for Naruto, he circled his arms around Tsunade, returning the hug. He too shedding a few tears unseen by the rest. Sakura's expression softened at the heart-warming scene, and Shizune could be seen wiping a tear off the corner of her eyes, both knowing what the two mean to each other. Jiraiya, after closing the door, looked back, giving a warm smile of his own to the pair in the center of the room. Everyone remained in that manner in silence for a couple of minutes. Soon the pair released each other and got up to their feet. Tsunade made her way back behind the desk and sat down. Likewise, Naruto and Jiraiya retrieved chairs to get seated in front of the Hokage and her two companions. After being seated, for the first time in 3 years, Naruto and Sakura made eye contact. Sakura gave warm smile and a slight nod that showed more was to come in catching up once they were in a more private setting. Naruto gave his usual in reply, his hand retreating to the back of his head, and grinned wide at Sakura. As everyone settled down, Tsunade leaned forward, elbows on her desk, palms together in wonder, and she stared at the both of them. "Explain, Jiraiya," she said simply. In return, Jiraiya had a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Ah, before I say anything though about why he is dressed and trained in such a manner, I suggest you take a look at the swords that Naruto wields. It might just do all the explaining for me," said Jiraiya. He looked at Naruto and nodded towards Tsunade. "Naruto. Hi, Ero Sennin," said Naruto sharply. He stood up, smoothly removed his pair of swords from his waist and gingerly placed the pair on Tsunade's table. Tsunade glanced down at the swords. At first glance it looks like a regular daisho set. Everything about it was black. The only difference was the way the different parts shine due to the different materials used to make the swords. Jiraiya, noticing the slight skepticism on Tsunade's face, cleared his throat and nodded to the swords. "Unsheath them," Jiraiya said, the glint in his eye even more evident. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at Jiraiya and looked at the swords again. Adjusting herself to sit upright, she reached forward and picked up the katana. Holding the sheath in one hand and the hilt in the other, preparing to unsheath it, unsure what she might see. She took another look at both Jiraiya and Naruto. The glint in Jiraiya's eye had intensified, bordering the line of impatience uncharacteristic of the man, and Naruto was already fidgeting with excitement and impatience typical of the brat. Taking in a breath, she exerted pressure on the sword and unsheathed it halfway. What she saw almost caused her to drop the sword. Hands trembling, she looked at the sword with a tinge of regret, sadness, and fear. "This is..." Tsunade trailed off shakily, glancing at Jiraiya. Jiraiya simply nodded once, while from the corner of her eye she could see Naruto's head bopping up and down vigorously. Tsunade resheathed the katana hurriedly, putting it down, and reached for the wakizashi, immediately unsheathing it. Looking at the second blade just reconfirmed her thoughts. The difference between this pair and regular pairs was that the blades weren't shining metallic silver. However, it was matte black with kanji engraved on each blade. The kanji for love on the katana and courage for the wakizashi. This was the pair of swords that was secretly sent to the daimyo of the Fire Country for safekeeping about close to 16 years ago. Sakura and Shizune blinked at the swords, at the nodding male heads, and finally Tsunade. They were definitely out of the loop. This is, Sakura said, trying to get an understanding of what was going on. A sudden snap of the wakizashi being sheathed caused Sakura to jerk back. Placing the wakizashi down, Tsunade turned to look at her apprentice, not surprised at the lost look she saw on her face. Though when she looked at Shizune, she was quite surprised to see the same look on her friend's face. Even though the location of the swords was kept highly confidential, the existence of the swords was common knowledge of that era. In fact, having read through numerous reports made by the Sandaime, there were many incidences where attempts have been made to locate and steal the swords within Konoha. She would have thought Shizune would have at least heard about the pair. This pair of swords is called the Flame of the Leaf. They once belonged to the Yondaime. Although he never used it, he had it forged for a specific purpose. Engraved on the swords, as you saw earlier, are the kanji for love and courage, which are the two principles in which the Yondaime believed one must have in order to carry out the will of fire that he saw in his family, his comrades, his friends, and his people, said Tsunade in a telltale manner. Jiraiya nodded once again in agreement. However, this time round Naruto had a faraway look with a bittersweet smile on his face, which didn't go unnoticed by Tsunade. She saw Shizune's face light up in recognition, and she smiled at her friend, nodding. Turning back to Sakura, she saw that her apprentice was further confused. Sakura was smart and didn't miss out much on what Tsunade left out. That would mean the purpose was never his to fulfill, and what is this purpose? You definitely sound like you know what it is, and why is it with Naruto now when he wasn't even born when the swords were forged? Asked Sakura, trying to elevate her confusion. Naruto stiffened at the questions and looked nervously at both Sakura and Tsunade. Tsunade was silent for a moment, trying to weigh the situation. She let out a sigh and kept her eyes at Naruto with a pained, compassionate expression while she gave her reply to Sakura without any eye contact. Yes, I do have the answers to your questions. As much as I want you to know, it is not my place to tell it to you. Sakura, seeing her sensei looking at Naruto in that particular manner, she placed her eyes on Naruto with a concerned frown. Naruto continues to fidget and shrunk into his seat under their scrutiny. Thinking back on the past, Naruto has always been boisterous and happy-go-lucky in his mannerisms. However, he never really talks that much about himself other than his love for ramen and his dream to be Hokage. Also, he has tendencies to go moody at times. I wonder how all this has to do with Naruto, thought Sakura. Tsunade cleared her throat, snapping everyone including Sakura out of their thoughts and giving Tsunade their attention. Alright, enough of this. Jiraiya, from what I see, I understand why there is reluctance in explaining your travels with Naruto. You don't have to. However, she pointed straight at Naruto, causing him to widen his eyes in surprise. You will submit a detailed report on your travels with this pervert over here, leaving nothing of importance out. I want facts and figures. None of your rubbish stories created by your inflated. Tsunade trailed off again when she noticed Jiraiya laughing hard, almost falling out of his chair, and Sakura giggling uncontrollably. Tsunade's eyebrow twitched in irritation. What is it this time? Asked Tsunade, horribly annoyed. Have you even seen the brat's handwriting? Said Jiraiya, slapping his thigh as he goes into another round of hard laughter. Nay, Jiraiya-sama, I wouldn't call it handwriting. It's more like chicken scratch. Sakura added in between giggles. Naruto looked down, hands gripping on his robe, mumbling expletives to himself. Tsunade turned to Sakura and gave her a sickeningly sweet smile. "Oh!" exclaimed inner Sakura, recognizing that smile. "Well, my dear apprentice, since you have had experience in reading his scratches, you have the honor of deciphering his script. When I am having difficulty in reading it," Tsunade said sweetly with an evil gleam in her eyes. Sakura looked sick. "Ah crap. Look what you got yourself into," screamed inner Sakura. "No!" shouted Naruto and Sakura together. They turned and looked at each other, frowning. "Shut up!" they screamed at each other in unison, yet again pointing fingers at each other. They then narrowed eyes at each other and simultaneously jerked away from each other's sight, crossing their arms and letting out a loud HN. The mimicking of each other giving the rest in the room some comic relief. "All right, enough. Hope you both learn from this." Sakura stopped making fun of Naruto. "Ha!" Naruto shouted, pointing at Sakura. The girl retorted by shaking a fist at him. "And you?" Tsunade continued. Naruto shrank back into his seat. "You will watch how our handwriting turns out for your report. If I can't make out one word, just one word, it'll burn the report and make you rewrite the whole thing." Naruto looked like he was about to faint. Sakura stuck her tongue out at him and Naruto glared defiantly at her. Tsunade gripped her hair in frustration at the antics of the young ones. Shizune just chuckled and Jiraiya shook his head disapprovingly. "Naruto," Suan said in a quiet, serious voice. That killed any interaction between the two young ones in the room, and Naruto snapped his attention to Tsunade. "Take a break from your training. It's been 3 years and work on that report. I expect it on my table in a week. If you are going to be Hokage as you said you would, you have to learn to write proper reports and hand them up on time," Tsunade continued. "Both of you are dismissed." Tsunade started shuffling some papers around, so did Sakura and Shizune, in preparation to start assisting the Hokage with the paperwork once again. Jiraiya got out of the seat and was about to exit the room when he heard, "Wait." That came from Naruto. "Take a break. Report. Dismissed. That's all." Naruto began to ask. Naruto turned to look at Sakura. "What about retrieving Sasuke? I know Ero Sennin said we still have time, but shouldn't there already be information about his whereabouts by now? And shouldn't plans be made, or at least start to be made?" Hearing all the questions, Sakura turned pale. Her hands shook and papers started to fall out from her hands. Tears threatened to fall. Without warning, Sakura suddenly stood up. The papers she was holding scattered on the floor and her chair got knocked aside. Before anyone could do or say anything, she fled the room with her hands covering her face. Both Naruto and Shizune rose from their seats to chase after the girl. Tsunade placed a hand on Shizune to stop her. Seeing Tsunade's example, Jiraiya grabbed Naruto by the arm and forcefully got him to be seated. "Let her go, Shizune. She needs her space. She still hasn't come to terms with it yet," said Tsunade softly. Shizune frowned slightly at the door left ajar and settled down in her chair even though she was worried. Naruto, unlike Shizune, did the opposite. He jumped right out of his seat again and slammed his hands hard on the table in front of him. The force of the action causing the items on the table to rattle again the heavy woodwork. "What the hell was that about?" shouted Naruto at the top of his voice, glaring at Tsunade. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at Naruto and her voice came out low and venomous. "What happened to the manners you displayed earlier?" If it was possible, Naruto's glare would have intensified as he dug his nails into the table in an effort not to explode at the moment. "If you do not calm down and take a seat to discuss this matter, not only will I refuse to utter a single word on the matter, but I would also personally make you regret you went out of line this time round." Suan finished every bit as venomous as the way she posed the earlier question. Naruto went from glaring to shocked. Tsunade had never threatened him in this manner before. Sure, there were times when she threatened him when he was being annoying, but that itself lacked the bite and conviction this threat held. Realizing the seriousness of the issue at hand, he retracted his hands and sat down once more, taking in a few deep breaths to calm himself down. Tsunade, seeing Naruto calm down, relaxed herself. Good. Suan sighed and took a look around the room in contemplation of how to tell Naruto the news. After a few moments of thick silence, she decided to be honest and straightforward. Naruto, Sasuke is dead. Sasuke is dead. Naruto repeated in askance, looking desperately at both Tsunade and Shizune, hoping this was all a sick joke. Tsunade looked aside. She couldn't bear to see the look on her surrogate little brother. Herself was a picture of pain. She knew how much Sasuke meant to Naruto. She knew the fact that if he couldn't complete his task and fulfill his promise to the girl he cared so much for, it would tear him apart. Shizune was openly staring straight at Naruto, unable to form any words at the moment, only feeling the pain that she knew would surface in Naruto once the information sunk in. Jiraiya looked off to the side with a dark, solemn look on his face. He had his arms and legs crossed in manner to withdraw himself from the scene. He doesn't deal with angst very well. He had viewed this as a possibility before. However, he has never voiced the possibility, fearing how Naruto would react to such negative thoughts. Suddenly, just as Sakura had done, Naruto stood up, knocking his own chair away. He, however, didn't run away in tears. He did start backing away from the rest. He also started to wave his arms wildly in front of him, barking a bitter laugh. His reaction shocked the remaining three in the room. Sasuke dead? You got to be kidding me. How can he die? That snake bastard wanted him, and Sasuke is strong. He wouldn't have gone down so easily in the company of that snake bastard and that. Naruto spat out the whole time, barking out that painful bitter laughter and shooting them accusing looks. Though one couldn't fault his logic over the situation, those in the room could see that he was using this to go into denial. Naruto continued to take small steps backwards in his bid to deny what has been told to him. There is no way he is dead, you hear me? There is no. The rest of the sentence was silenced as Naruto was covered by a forceful hug, pinning his arms to the side and his shock once again rendering him immobile. This time round it wasn't Tsunade, but the tight, forceful embrace came from Shizune. Her left arm curled around Naruto's arm and body, gripping tightly on the back of his robe, and her right arm at the back of his head, pressing it down on her shoulder while her own head pressed down on his. Jiraiya left his seat to close the door once again, and perhaps also to get further away from the intense emotions that are rising in the room. Don't. Naruto, Shizune muttered out loud on his robe in between sobs. Don't doubt us. It's painful enough having to deliver this news to you, knowing how much he meant to you as a brother. Don't doubt us. It's even more painful seeing you react this way, trying to pretend that what we say isn't real. We wouldn't do such a thing to you. Just let it out, Naruto-kun. We know you are in pain. That you are hurting. Jiraiya, now leaning on the door, was facing his feet with his eyes shut tightly, willing his tears back. Tsunade, still unwilling to look up, also has her eyes shut tight. However, she has already started releasing tears of her own. Upon hearing the last words Shizune said, Naruto lifted his arms, clutched Shizune's shirt tightly, dug his face deeper into her shoulder, and let out a long, loud, pain-filled wail. Hot tears streamed down from the corners of his eyes and drenched into Shizune's shirt. The vibrations of the painful release shudders through Shizune. She shifted her hold on the boy to a more gentle yet firm hug, stroking his back, allowing him to pour his emotions out and run themselves down, while she herself does the same, crying for the boy's loss. The occupants of the room remained that way for quite a while, all waiting for Naruto to finish letting out his grief and pain. As his tears reduced to sobs and finally coming to a halt, Naruto released his grip on Shizune's shirt. Instead of immediately letting go, he tightened his arms around Shizune for a moment in a light squeeze. "Thank you, Shizune Onichan," he said softly into her shoulder. Finally he released her, and as he wipes his remaining tears away with his robe, he calmly made his back to his seat. Making eye contact with Tsunade, he gave her a small sad smile, and Tsunade returned one of her own. Shizune, as she herself makes her way back to her seat, squeezes Naruto lightly on his shoulder in a final show of support to carry on. Naruto's eyes shifts a bit in discomfort, knowing that the conversation will not end in this manner. As he runs through his head what to ask, Tsunade rests her eyes on Naruto with a gentle, attentive expression on her face. Naruto decided on asking a simple question. "How?" Tsunade closed her eyes for a moment and gives a slight nod, more herself rather than anyone else. "We don't actually know for certain. I sent out Anbu forces for intelligence missions in hopes of finding out the location of the Sound's hidden village ever since you left. About a month ago we managed to pinpoint its location. After confirming the location, I sent out a squadron specializing in infiltration. They returned a couple of days ago. From the reports that were submitted upon infiltrating the village, it was discovered that the village was in chaos. It was stated that the reason for the chaos couldn't be pinpointed, however, it could stem from the fact that a pair from the squadron found the bodies of Kabuto Orochimaru and Uchiha Sasuke." Tsunade paused to see if there was any reaction coming from Naruto with her last few words. Naruto's eyes were downcast and had a solemn look on his face, however he remained calm. Naruto, aware of Tsunade's intentions, just glances up and softly said, "Carry on, Ba-chan." For once Tsunade couldn't get irritated at his way of addressing her. In fact, she welcomed it, as it reminded her so much of the bright, energetic boy that he once was before he left, and hopefully someone that he would return to be soon. Tsunade nodded in acknowledgement and continued her narration. Of the pair, one got close to inspect the bodies while the other posed as a lookout. Reports from the lookout states that from his position he could see who they were clearly, and got confirmation from his partner after he returned from his examination to prove the authenticity of the bodies. However, the squadron was engaged in a battle on their way to exiting the village. They managed to overpower their enemy's escape from further attacks and even secured a prisoner. Unfortunately, with a stroke of bad luck, those who were injured in this mission included the person who did the examination and is currently in the hospital. Although his condition is stable, he is in a coma, and we have yet to get details other than hearsay that was reported by his partner. Further information can only be received in due time and if he wakes up. However, they managed to bring back proof for one of the bodies. The last sentence was said in a slow, cautious manner that had an implication that didn't go missing on Naruto. "He did it, didn't he?" he asked in a tight, controlled voice. "Naruto, you have to understand that." Tsunade's attempt in a rushed explanation was halted when she saw Naruto sharply raise his arm for her to stop, and him shutting his eyes tight in pain. Tsunade shook her head slightly and rubbed at her temples, trying to soothe the build-up pressure that has formed in her head from today's short but intense event. This was painful for the both of them in different ways, but painful nonetheless. Naruto took a very deep breath and exhaled forcefully, letting his arm drop to his side again, and as he slowly opened his eyes again, it could be seen that despite the evident pain in his eyes, he had calmed himself down once again. "I understand, Tsunade Bakan. It is protocol in all hidden villages when faced with such situations. Though just because I understand doesn't mean I have to like it," he forced out seriously. Jiraiya, still leaning on the door, gave a small, proud, knowing smile. Shizune blinked in slight shock, and Tsunade just stared blankly. "What?" snapped Naruto in slight irritation at the looks the pair were giving him. In his irritation and dislike of how things turned out, he didn't realize the fact that he had just said something very uncharacteristic of his old self and had displayed to pair one way in how he had matured in his travels. Tsunade shook her head, dismissing the look she was giving him. Of course not, Naruto. Not for a moment I expected that from you. Hearing that, Naruto's expression softened and he proceeded to ask his next question. What are you going to do with it? I know this so-called proof of yours are his eyes. There is no denying it, and the fact that you have it preserved somewhere. What else other than that would prove his presence? For now the elders, council and myself have yet to reach a decision. Tsunade replied simply. Naruto quirked an eyebrow at Tsunade. For now, why the hesitation? It's been a few days already, and a few days too long for such an important decision. Even if a decision didn't want to be made in haste, a day or two would have proved sufficient to think it over and reach a conclusion, or at least a plan, Naruto prodded, sensing something was off. Tsunade's eyebrow twitched. Shizune blinked even more than earlier, and Jiraiya's knowing smile grew to a grin. Since when did this brat get so smart and perceptive? Tsunade thought and narrowed her eyes at Jiraiya for a moment. Tsunade sighed and laid eyes on Naruto once again. Okay, brat. I have plans, but seriously, I'm not going to tell you about it now. Why not? Exclaimed Naruto, characteristics of his former self shining through. Because it's been taxing enough on both of us and those in the room already. The reason why I dismissed you earlier in the first place was for you to get some rest and settle down before having to hear the news. I even gave instructions for the nins in the village not to reveal the information till I said they could. Tsunade paused, taking in a breath, trying to calm down. Besides, I wanted to speak to you about it without Sakura's presence. Although she has accepted it, she is still very unsettled over the news. Tsunade, looking at Naruto now, could see that the look of guilt entering his face. Tsunade sighed. And look, I didn't tell you that so that you beat yourself up over it. Go. Again he interrupted her, this time by suddenly standing up again. He stepped forward and retrieved his swords that was still lying on the table. As he re-secured his swords to his waist belt, Tsunade spoke up again in irritation. And just what are you doing? I didn't even get to finish what I wanted to say earlier. She said, seething and glaring at the young man. Upon finishing the menial task, Naruto looked up with a mischievous grin on his face and said playfully. I do recall being dismissed earlier. Not giving Tsunade a chance to retort, he turned around, tucked his arms into the sleeves of his robe, and made his way to the door. Jiraiya, seeing this, let out a chuckle and stepped away from the door. If looks could kill, Naruto would probably be headless from the intense glare Tsunade was giving him. Don't you forget your neatly written report, brat. Tsunade shouted after him. Hi Ba-chan. You will have it in 2 days' time instead of a week, Naruto said, nonchalantly waving his hand without turning around as he exited the room. As soon as the door closed, Tsunade threw her hands up in the air and lets out a cry of frustration. Arg. That brat is so infuriating. Jiraiya and Shizune just chuckled at the outcry, as both could hear that despite the frustration and irritation evident in the tone of voice, there was also hints of affection in that statement which Tsunade tried to smother. Night has fallen as splashes were made in the running water of the stream by a person idling next to it in the dark. This person, with cheek-length pink hair and glazed aquamarine eyes that was stained with a tinge of red signifying an end to a bout of crying, was carelessly throwing pebbles into the running water. Sakura was seated, huddled up with her knees to her chest, an arm lying on top of her knees cushioning the chin that rested on it, and the other arm reaching out to her side to pick a random pebble to be thrown next into the stream. Staring out at the water, she thought of the first time her team worked together in this very area trying to get the 2 bells from Kakashi-sensei. Sakura chuckled and thought of the good old days long gone. A sudden prickling sensation running up her back alerted her to an intruding presence behind her. Immediately getting up and drawing out a kunai, she got into a defensive battle stance. Looking into the shadows of the vegetation that was behind her, she tried to spot the location of the presence she felt. Directly in front of her, about 25 meters, she spotted a gleam of light resembling a reflection of the moon rays that was out in this clear night sky. Narrowing her eyes, she barely makes out the figure enough to know that the object reflecting the light was a forehead protector, meaning she was facing a ninja. For a while there you were resembling a brooding bastard I used to know, the figure said in a chuckling voice. She knew that voice. She just heard it earlier this afternoon. Naruto. Who else could be bothered to associate himself with a brooding bastard? The figure asked lightheartedly as he stepped out of the shadows and into the dimly lit clearing. The moonlight was shining directly at Naruto, and even in the distance Sakura could tell that he had on his face a sad reminiscing smile. She dropped her guard, and as she kept her kunai she replied in the same lighthearted manner, "Other than myself, only a one-eyed tardy pervert and a loud obnoxious brat. Though he doesn't seem to be very loud and obnoxious at the moment." Naruto laughed out loud. "Loud enough for you, Sakura-chan. People do change over the years, you know," said Naruto, reducing his laughter to a chuckle as he took steps to reduce the distance between the two former teammates. "I noticed you changed a lot. From growing taller to the fancy clothes, new weapons, and opposing mannerisms. I can't say the same for you other than your similar height growth and those gloves of yours," Naruto said teasingly, leaving a lot of things out that he noticed. "And you are still a brat despite your changes," said Sakura, crossing her arms in mock annoyance. "How could you not see the most obvious change in me?" she continued, glaring at him. By now Naruto closed the gap to about slightly more than a meter away. He looked at the way she was standing with her arms crossed and one of her feet tapping, impatiently waiting for his answer. He looked up at the sky, tapping his cheek with his fingers in thought. He then shifted his gaze back at Sakura, purposely alternating between her face and the way she crossed her arms with a teasing look to match his earlier voice. "Well, I didn't think you would want me to mention about those," said Naruto, allowing his gaze to linger a little longer than necessary at her crossed arms, or rather, those. She blinked and looked at where he was looking at. Her eyes widened in realization and immediately struck Naruto at the side of his head. "Hentai. Itai." Naruto was bent over, one hand on his knee supporting his weight, the other hand rubbing the side of his head that was struck vigorously. "And here I was about to add that you are treating me a lot nicer. Though after that hit I could definitely say that you have grown stronger." "Ha! You better know it," exclaimed Sakura, crossing her arms once more before realizing what she was doing and settled for placing her hands on her hips. Though that wasn't any much better in Naruto's view, as it just puts emphasis on how much curvier her body has grown. However, Naruto decided to keep this to himself. "Well, at least for the time being," Naruto thought mischievously. "And I seriously hope you haven't turned into a pervert like Kakashi-sensei or Jiraiya-sama," she said, narrowing her eyes at him. Naruto straightened himself and shrugged at her statement, taking a few steps to the edge of the bank of the stream. "What is that supposed to mean?" Naruto shrugged once more and bends down to take a seat. He pats the ground next to him in a silent invitation to sit next to him. Sakura frowned slightly in confusion and finally just decided to settle down next to him. "What's with all the secrecy? It's not just the shrug earlier. Also the lack of explanation for your training, your travels, your new outfit, weapons, and the nervous looks you were having when I was asking those questions earlier this afternoon," Sakura said, voicing her thoughts and curiosity. Naruto curled up in a similar manner to Sakura's posture before he made his presence. "Everyone has their secrets, Sakura-chan. Some more than others. Returning back to Konoha, I knew there would come a point where everything will be revealed. Not just to you but to everyone I know, and possibly more. However, that is not my intention tonight when I looked for you. However, I promise you that you would be the first to know, said Naruto, his solemn mood not having left him totally. And you always keep your promise, nay? Sakura said, smiling genuinely at Naruto. However, Sakura didn't realize how the innocent question reminding her of his ways affected him in a drastic way. Guilt set in so fast and hard that it hit like a punch from Tsunade to his stomach. Naruto avoided eye contact like a plague and started trembling like he did earlier on. Sakura noticed the change and knew something was wrong. She shifted her body to directly face him while Naruto was still facing the stream. Naruto? Sakura asked with concern, though still oblivious to what exactly is going on with him. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. Naruto jerked violently at the touch, shocking Sakura. Naruto curled further into himself, gripping the sleeves of his robe tightly, eyes shut. Sakura, seeing this, put her in threat of going into another round of bursting into tears. Naruto, please. Sakura pleaded. I'm sorry, Sakura-chan, Naruto stuttered, his voice coming out raw and hoarse. Really? Sorry. Naruto continued, tears already trailing the corners of his shut eyes. For? Sakura asked with a timid, worried voice. For breaking my promise. Not once, twice, Sasuke's gone, this time for real. Naruto struggled to get out. Finally getting what was going on after hearing this and the way he struggled with his words, Sakura launched at him in a fierce hug, bursting out in tears loudly. If Naruto had not reacted quickly to brace himself with his arm, she would have knocked him over, sending both of them sprawling on the ground. Sakura tightened her hold on him and shook her head violently at the back of his neck, her hair wiping around, gently hitting his neck repeatedly. No, don't say that. If it's anyone that should be sorry, it's me. If I didn't make you promise me that, you wouldn't be suffering like this. I'm so horrid. Even after all the times you risked yourself saving, protecting us, I still treated you like dirt. She cried. She cried hard and loud as she pressed her face into his back now. Naruto held on to her arm and shed his own tears silently in contrast to hers. As her crying became soft sobs, she continued in a small voice, I promised myself to make it up to you. Sakura-chan, you don't have to, Naruto said softly, touched by her words. And I wasn't the only suffering. You are suffering too. No. Yes. I mean, arg whatever. That's not important at the moment. Yes, it is to me. He continued with the same soft, concerned voice. Even though it's not like my silly crush on you back then anymore, which annoyed you to no end, you are still one of my precious people and I still care for you nonetheless. Naruto could feel fresh tears on his back as he heard her mumble almost incoherently, see. Even now you still care for me even when I was so mean to you. The past never mattered to me, Sakura-chan. I don't care. I'm still going to make it up to you. After you tell me all of your secrets, I'm sharing with you mine and dig out things even you don't know about yourself. Hi. You are going to be my bestest friend next to Ino Pig. Hi. We are going to hang out more often. Go shopping so you have more things to wear than just your blinding orange jumper and this oversized samurai robe. Hi. We'll find new places to eat at so that you won't be eating just ramen at Ichiraku or that nasty instant stuff you have stuffed in your kitchen. Hi. And I'll find you a girlfriend that will be just as pretty as I am so you will stop having perverted thoughts about me. Hi. Suddenly Sakura pulled back, though her arms still lightly around Naruto, and shifted herself again so that this time so could stare at him straight in the eyes. Naruto blinked. Sakura's eyes narrowed slightly. You weren't thinking of anything perverted about me this whole time, were you? She asked with a hint of a venomous voice. At this point Naruto couldn't help but burst out in a loud boisterous laugh for a few moments like he used to in the past while Sakura still looked at him skeptically. Naruto just closed his eyes and shook his head slightly with a small sincere smile to show her how silly her thoughts were. Casting her doubt aside, she launched herself onto him for another fierce hug. This time, however, due to the different direction from where the force came from, he couldn't brace himself and he fell on his back with Sakura a little off to his side, arms around his neck. She snuggled closer while mumbling something very softly. Best of friends, nay Naruto. He couldn't help but be touched by the childish sincerity of those simple words. Hi. He replied, simply putting his arm around the girl that was once the girl of his dreams. As they remained silent in this position, not much time passed before Naruto heard soft snores coming from the girl. She must have been exhausted after the emotional rollercoaster ride today. Seeing that his robe was spread out after their tumble to the ground and not wanting to disturb the girl's peaceful slumber, he wrapped his robe around the both of them as best as he could to prevent both of them from catching a cold on this chilly night. Looking up at the clear sky and the shining stars, Naruto wondered how such an emotionally and mentally wrecking day ended with such a note of childish innocence. Naruto was all too aware of how being a ninja and leading a traumatic life at the earlier points of his life has robbed him of his childhood and innocence. Being forced to grow up at a fast pace, at times of high emotional and mental pressure, could cause one to regress into a state of him or her being a child, revealing what it was like for the person when him or her was very young. Looking down at the fragile state that Sakura was right now, he could see that when she was a lot younger, she probably was a lonely girl wanting nothing but a close friend. Despite the differences that they both had 3 years ago and even now, maybe they actually had quite a lot in common if only the degrees were to differ. Thinking back on the words that Sakura had rambled about, Naruto was lulled to a peaceful sleep himself as he looked forward to a better friendship with a childish grin plastered on his face that was synonymous with Uzumaki Naruto. Okay. The way this chapter ended was not how I initially planned. There wasn't even much mention on Sasuke, which I initially wanted to focus on. However, as I wrote that scene, it seemed to have taken on a life of its own and veered away from my initial plan. Still, Sakura ended sleeping. They didn't fall asleep when I planned it, they actually headed back home playfully bickering like they used to. As I read through the scene once more, I realized what was going on between the both of them, or rather Sakura, and the last paragraph was my attempt at narrating what I saw out of the situation which I have witnessed and experienced for myself in real life. I hope I did at least a proper or a decent job of wrapping up the scene. A note to Demon Sword: even though this will not be a Narusaku pairing, I hope you enjoyed this close moment they had together. Though this chapter came out real fast after the first one, don't expect the next one to come out so soon. I'll be busy as I have to head back to camp, national service, thus I'll be away from my laptop for quite a while. Sobs. Naruto stirred a little as he woke up from his sleep. Opening his eyes, he had to use his hand to block out the glaring sunlight from his face. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he took a look around his surroundings. He was still lying down beside the stream with the pink-haired girl snuggling precariously next to him, showing they have been undisturbed throughout the night. Looking at Sakura, Naruto noticed that the girl was still sleeping. She had a look of peacefulness on her face as she was softly breathing on his chest with her hair partially covering her face. Naruto contemplated on whether to disturb the girl's peaceful slumber. She probably has training with Tsunade or other things to accomplish. One of which would probably be explaining to her parents why she didn't return home for the night. Naruto paled a little at the complications this situation could result in. Even though they weren't disturbed, it didn't change the possibility that they could have been spotted in this manner. After all, this is a training ground which was used by a lot of people. Naruto looked at the position of the sun. It seemed like it was still early. If they weren't spotted by now, the chances of being spotted would increase by the moment. As innocent as yesterday's proceedings went, the end result would have looked suspicious, and it would take a lot of explaining to dispel such suspicion. Especially if the night was spent with a person of special circumstances like him. A word from a villager passing by would get the girl into a lot of trouble. Other than selfish indulgence, there wasn't a reason to remain this way. Naruto shifted his position a little to be able to face Sakura. Gently shaking her, Naruto attempted to wake the girl up. Sakura-chan, wake up. It's morning already, said Naruto, still nudging the girl. After a few more tries, finally the girl stirred. Unhooking her arms from Naruto's neck, she used an arm to push herself up while the other hand rubbed at her eyes sleepily. Opening her eyes, she saw Naruto still lying down, looking at her with an analytical look on his face. Naruto was looking out for her reaction to waking up next to him. Silently he wonders if he was going to be smacked into oblivion. It surprised Naruto to see Sakura blinking at him and her expression changing to something warm as the look of recognition was evident on her face. It was even more surprising as there was no shyness or awkwardness between the two as they smiled at each other. The exchange was the recognition and acceptance of yesterday's events and the way it turned out. The both of them sat up, brushing off the dirt from their clothes. While doing so, Naruto decided to address his concern. Say, Sakura-chan, don't you have training Tsunade Bakken today? Also, how are you going to explain not returning home yesterday night to your parents? Said Naruto, noticing Sakura looking up in thought at his words. What time do you think it is? Sakura asked. Looking at how far the sun has risen, it looks to be about 7:30, Naruto replied. Sakura got up on her feet and delivered a soft, playful punch to the top of Naruto's head. Naruto gave a look of bewilderment. Sakura snorted in return. Firstly, it's Tsunade-sama. I would have thought after the way you presented yourself yesterday you would actually express your respect for her in a more formal manner, Sakura said with a hint of annoyance. Old habits die hard, said Naruto, shrugging. Sakura rolled her eyes at him. I don't have to meet Tsunade-sama for training till 10. I'm sure you are aware of her sleeping patterns, said Sakura, to which Naruto snorted before she continued. About my parents, it shouldn't be a problem. I work shifts at the hospital nowadays as part of my training with Tsunade-sama. I'll let them know that something urgent came up at the hospital which ended really late, so I slept over there. That would explain not being able to call and not returning home. It wouldn't be the first time such a thing has happened over the last few years. Naruto nodded thoughtfully. Sakura extended her arm to help Naruto get up on his feet. Come, let's head back. Even though not returning home at night, I always returned early in the morning. My parents will be expecting me to return for breakfast, a shower, and a change of fresh clothes. Of course, I also want to head back to my apartment. It's been ages since I touched the place. I probably have a lot of cleaning to do, said Naruto. Sakura let out a laugh and started walking back to the village. Hey, wait up. Why are you laughing? Asked Naruto, frowning as he caught up and fell in step with Sakura. Sakura giggled some more. Oh, you'll see, said Sakura with a mischievously evil grin. Naruto's eye widened. Huh. Sakura just waved her hand dismissingly, showing that he will have to find out on his own when he reached his apartment. Okay. Beside, I have other things to get done as well. Oh, such as? Sakura asked curiously. Well, I got to write that report. Even though Ba-chan said a week, I told her before I left I would give it to her by tomorrow. With 3 years of facts and figures, I would have to get started right away, Naruto stated. Hearing about Naruto writing down the 3 years that have gone got Sakura in deep thought. Naruto eyed her curiously. Sakura-chan. Sakura shook her head slightly, dismissing any worries that would have risen from Naruto. I know we still have a lot things to talk about. I was just remembering what happened yesterday and what I said. Even though I was being very emotional, I meant what I said to you yesterday, said Sakura now with a very determined look on her face. Naruto's face broke into his usual wide grin. I didn't doubt you for a moment, Sakura-chan. Naruto exclaimed, laughing. Sakura smiled in return. I know. I just wanted you to be sure of it once you see that I am a lot more calm, Sakura stated. Naruto acknowledged her by nodding his head vigorously. He stopped nodding suddenly and his eyes peered up at the sky in thought. Hey, do you remember where the weapons shop are? It's been a while and I can't really remember the exact location, Naruto inquired. Sakura raised an eyebrow at Naruto. Huh, why do you need to go to the weapons shop? You lost all of your kunai and shuriken during your travels or something. Besides, you already have your swords, right? I bet you use that more. Well, I need some stuff custom made. Another thing which I intended to do today. Okay. Well, the one I frequent has a very good blacksmith. It's near Ichiraku, so it shouldn't be hard to find. Just head down a couple shops towards the Hokage Tower from Ichiraku. Once you hit a junction, take a right turn and it should be a couple of shops down that stretch. Thanks, Sakura-chan. Naruto suddenly stopped walking and bent to the side, digging into his weapon holster. Sakura stopped as well and looked back at Naruto, wondering what the hell he was up to this time. Naruto pulled out a small odd-shaped weapon. It looked like a cross between a kunai and a sai. Naruto looked at Sakura and extended his hand to her, offering the odd weapon. Before I forget, here, take it, said Naruto. Sakura blinked in confusion and looked at the weapon, oddly trying to figure out what it is. It's none like she has ever seen before. What is this? What am I supposed to do with this and how? Sakura asked. Naruto grinned mischievously. That's the custom matakunai that I need to make in more numbers. When you are in trouble and if you need help, make sure to stick it hard in the ground, Naruto answered. Sakura gave him an incredulous look. And just how is that supposed to help me? I'll explain that together with the rest of the stuff I said I will tell you about, Naruto replied, looking ready to shoot down any protest. Seeing that look on his face, Sakura sighed in resignation, knowing she won't be getting anything out of him for now. Fine then, she replied sullenly. Naruto did a little skip as he walked down the hallway to his apartment. So far as tension-filled the events have been, things have turned out well, even though it was not what he expected. As he turned the key to unlock the apartment door, he froze right before he opened it, remembering Sakura's words to him earlier. Oh, you'll see. As much as he was curious, he couldn't help feeling dreadful. It wasn't so much of the mischievous hint in her voice that bothered him. However, when it came to matters of his apartment, it was rarely cheerful with the treatment that he got. Despite how unlikely the case of ill treatment was to come, hearing from the way Sakura said it, he couldn't shake of memories of crashing windows, upturned furniture, vandalized walls and such. Cautiously turning the knob, he opened the door silently. Once again, things weren't how he expected them to be. Sure, his fears were unwarranted. However, the sight of a spick-and-span apartment where everything was neatly placed impeccably with smells of scented cleaning solution that seemed to be recently used just caused him to just stare dreamily into his uncharacteristically clean living room. Shaking out of his reverie, he took a couple of steps in and turned around to quietly close the door. As if still not quite believing the sight that he saw earlier, he turned a little bit to peek behind him to verify if he was dreaming. The sight stubbornly remained the same. He turned around fully and slowly walked around the small cozy living room, touching the furniture and other various things as if inspecting the reality of things. In Naruto's shock, he was unaware of the presence of another person in the apartment. Neither was the other person aware of Naruto's entry. That person was just exiting the toilet, looking down, her dark hair partially covering her face, keeping her pale eyes out of sight from other people as she casually observed to see if she cleaned her hands properly after doing a little touching up to the apartment. After all, she had heard news that her old crush from her academy days was returning soon. She was sure that he would appreciate returning to a nice clean apartment. Hinata, eyes downcast, was still unaware of the fact that the very person was doing exactly so. About 5 meters away in front of her, Naruto with his back to her was still in a daze, feeling around the room, marveling at its cleanliness. Hinata lifted up her gaze after sufficiently satisfied with the state of cleanliness of her hands. She unwittingly let out a surprised squeak at seeing the presence of another person in the apartment, which didn't go unheard by that person. Huh? Naruto muttered, turning his head to look at the source. Hinata's eyes widened in a mingling of recognition and surprise. The very person she was thinking about, although looking very different, was definitely standing in front, looking back at her. In acknowledgement to this, her being sensitive around Naruto, her senses were overloading. She was starting to feel giddy and her vision was blurring. As the acknowledgement hit its peak, everything went blank for Hinata and crumbled to the floor. Hinata stirred as her consciousness started to return. She could feel that she was lying on something soft, possibly a bed, and she was covered with a blanket. Opening her eyes, she saw clear blue eyes staring intently at her. Realizing and knowing who it was, shock sprung once more as a squeak involuntarily came out and she instinctively sank underneath the cover for safety. From under the cover she could hear Naruto laughing. Hinata reddened hearing his laughter. With a burst of indignance she lifted the of her face and mildly glared at Naruto, who was seated on a chair trying his best not to fall over from laughing. Though she herself has changed a lot over the years under the scrutiny of her beloved, she could only pull off so much. Don't laugh. It's not funny, she protested softly and hesitantly. Naruto tried his best to stifle his laughter and failed. Launching into another bout of laughter, this he also failed to remain in his seat as he fell over and out of Hinata's sight. Gomen ne Hinata. I didn't mean to laugh, but you got to admit that your reaction was rather comical, Naruto said, his head popping up right next to Hinata's from the side of the bed. Hinata jerked back slightly at his sudden reappearance and at such close proximity. She could feel her cheeks reddening again and she tugged at the blanket to cover half of her face in an attempt to hide the blush. Naruto backed up a little bit and stood up. He pulled his fallen chair upright and close to the bed before taking a seat once again. He then rested his eyes on Hinata again and his head tilted to the side in curiosity. To Hinata, that small action looked so adorable to her that she thought she was going to pass out again and die a very happy death. So Hinata, I placed you on my bed seeing that you fainted. However, I don't remember bringing you home in the first place, Naruto said with hints of amusement in his voice and his eyes. Hinata's face went from pink to white to bright red in a span of a second. It didn't hit her till then that she was on his bed, and also the way he put his words together gave the impression of something that have sprouted from her fantasies might happen. He did notice this and burst out laughing again. Gomen. It's rather cruel of me to tease you like that seeing you just fainted. I don't want to scare a shy girl like you into fainting again, Naruto said, putting a stop to his laughter. Hinata calmed herself down and sat up. She managed to hold eye contact with Naruto. It's okay. I'm not as shy as I used to be. I have changed over the years as well. I was just shocked at suddenly seeing you again, Hinata said evenly. She silently congratulated herself at being able to sound normal despite the embarrassing moments that just passed. That's good, Naruto trailed off, nodding thoughtfully. However, without warning, his expression reverted to a playful, mischievous look once again. Because here I am thinking what would happen if I were to see you unconscious once again on my bed. Hinata fainted straight away after her brain processed the words. It was seriously too much for the poor girl. Oh crap. I think I went too far with that. Arg, too much influence from Ero Sennin and the blasted Kitsune. It took a while longer this time round for Hinata to wake up, but eventually she did. She almost passed out again just remembering what Naruto had said to her. Her eyes widened. Because here I am thinking what would happen if I were to see you unconscious once again on my bed. Hinata immediately lifted up the blanket to check herself. Seeing that her clothing were all in place, she sighed out in relief and some part of her acknowledged disappointment. What am I thinking? Hinata berated herself, turning red at her own reactions. Ahem. Hinata heard someone cough. Her head snapped to the side. She saw Naruto seated on the chair. His head once again adorably tilted to the side, his cheek resting on his palm with his forearm propped up on the arm of the chair, observing her with an eyebrow raised. You didn't think I was serious, did you? Naruto asked innocently. Hinata tried to get out. Her whole face felt hot from embarrassment and she felt like her head was going to explode from the pressure. Naruto started to panic when he saw Hinata swaying slightly. Straightening up with eyes wide open and waving his hands violently in front of him, he attempted to somewhat calm the poor girl down. Gomen, I won't tease you. Don't faint on me again. Naruto shouted, panic already full blown. Hinata burst out in laughter. Naruto froze at the sudden action. Hinata suddenly realizing what she did, she clamped a hand over her mouth. Gomen, I didn't mean to laugh at you. It's just that you looked so comical like that. I couldn't help it, Hinata said softly, doing a little imitation of Naruto's actions earlier. Naruto himself laughed at that. Rubbing the back of his head, he gave her his usual wide grin. Hi, it's okay. I never heard you laugh before. It's refreshing. You should do that more often, Naruto said. Hinata gave a small smile and nodded, blushing slightly at the compliment. Hey, earlier on, before I couldn't help teasing you, I actually wanted to ask you how come you are in my apartment and why is it so clean? Naruto asked, eyes twinkling when he mentioned clean, still in disbelief. Hinata laughed slightly at his expression. After you left 3 years ago, there was an incident where Hokage-sama happened to see the state your apartment was in. To say the least, she was appalled, Hinata said with her usual softness. Naruto's sweat dropped. Hinata laughed softly and continued. Hokage-sama herself paid for a D-rank mission to my team to clean up the place, and after which I requested that I maintained its cleanliness from time to time. Hinata blushed at the end. Naruto gave her a sincere smile of thanks. Though I don't remember passing her a key, Naruto muttered thoughtfully. I heard Kakashi-san brought her through the window, Hinata explained. Naruto's sweat dropped again, this time with a little twitch. Hokage-sama got a locksmith to make a spare key for the apartment, which is how I got into the apartment, Hinata further explained. Naruto nodded. Hinata shifted a little while she fished in her pockets for something. Pulling out a metallic object, she extended it to Naruto. Seeing that it was the spare key, Naruto shook his head and pushed it back to her. Hinata's forehead creased a little in confusion. Keep it safe for me, okay? I tend to lose small things like that from time to time, so one of my friends having a spare could help me out when there is a need to, Naruto said with a small nervous laugh. Hinata looked at Naruto and just nodded slightly, internally feeling grateful that he at least thought of her that way. Naruto smiled again, but his stomach growled. His smile turned sheepish and apologetic. Say, have you eaten breakfast? As you can hear, I'm quite hungry, Naruto said, laughing. Hinata smiled and shook her head slightly. Well, great. Seeing that I haven't been home in 3 years, there's no food here, so let's go out and grab something. My treat, Naruto exclaimed. Naruto-kun, you don't have to. Nah, don't worry about it. Consider it repaying you back helping me keep my apartment neat and tiny. Naruto said with a wave of his hands. Oh, okay, Hinata accepted hesitantly but inwardly beaming. As both of them made it out of his room, Naruto grabbed his robe and led her to the door. Wait, Naruto-kun, Hinata said, halting. Huh, Naruto said, looking back. Hinata pointed to the dining table. In the middle of the table was a big basket of fruit and vegetables. Naruto ended up on the floor with a thud as he face-faulted. I don't remember seeing that when I came in this morning, and I thought you said there wasn't any food at home, said Hinata, looking curiously at Naruto. It seemed to Hinata he knew how and why that basket got there. It's Kakashi-sensei, he must have snuck in while we were in the room. He has this thing about stuffing me with fruits and vegetables once in a while, Naruto grumbled, obviously not pleased with the gift. Hinata giggled at his grumbling. Then we shouldn't waste Kakashi-san's effort, nay, Naruto-kun, she said with a smile. Naruto nodded grudgingly. Hi. Why don't you take a seat at the table while I get us some water, K? Naruto said with a little bit of resentment. Hinata laughed softly at his silly antics, nodded and got seated at the table. Naruto proceeded to the kitchen to get the glasses and water. As he made his way to the table, he noticed Hinata frowning slightly while at the same time having a blush. A little confused, he quirked an eyebrow at her. Hinata? Naruto asked cautiously. Hinata looked up at him and quickly averted her eyes away from him. Her frown deepened and her cheeks grew redder. Naruto could see that she was trying to smooth out the frown on her face but failing. She looked almost angry. Is she? Wonder why is she acting this way? Naruto thought as sat across her and placed a glass of water in front of her, still observing her. Hinata lifted her hand, showing a piece of paper that was previously blocked out of view by the basket. Her hand was trembling slightly. Apparently a note came with the basket. Still not thinking much about it, he took the note. Taking a drink from his own glass, he held up the note and read it. Dear Naruto, you sly fox you, ho ho ho. After I returned from a mission yesterday evening, I heard that one of my students has returned from his training journey. Out of the goodness of my heart, insert huge heart shape drawn here, I went in search to greet my number one unpredictable student. It took me some time to find you. However, when I did, the sight that greeted me melted my heart, insert deformed looking heart shape drawn here. Ho ho ho. There you were sleeping soundly with, insert musical note drawn here, sweet Sakura-chan, insert musical note drawn here, in your arms like without a care in the world. I couldn't bear to break that scene, so I left. I came in this morning thinking you would be famished after yesterday's activities. Ho ho ho. Thus I left you with this basket here, insert basket of fruits and vegetables drawn here, seeing that you have the company of yet another unconscious girl. You lucky dog, you don't want to know what is drawn here, you, and not even 24 hours has passed. You are definitely Jiraiya-sama's student and number one unpredictable ninja. I'm proud of you. Ho ho ho. I hope you did what I would have. Insert drawing of Kakashi with eyes crinkled in glee, cheeks blushing. P.S. I faintly heard sounds of scribbling yesterday. I can't wait for the next ICHA Paradise volume to come out. Ho ho ho. Naruto read the note, frozen in place, glass already crashed to the floor with the water still in his mouth. His face grew pale from the start and more so as each line went past. As he finished the last line of the note, the water came splurting out, effectively destroying the note. That gave him a direct view of Hinata. Her face was downcast now, hiding whatever emotions that were displayed on her face. Hinata. Naruto started, unsure what to say to her. I shouldn't have read that. I'm sorry, Hinata said, her voice clipped despite the apology. Hinata. Naruto tried again. It's none of my business. I know. Hinata snapped, jerking her head up, staring right straight at him. Naruto flinched, not expecting that. her eyes wide and reddish looking to burst out in tears and pain etched in her other features. Recovering from the shock, Naruto's expression reflected her pain, however, in a much softer manner. Hinata's eyes narrowed and used all of her willpower to will her tears back. I don't want his sympathy. I don't. Hinata's eyes widened again when Naruto suddenly disappeared from her sight. She felt something wrap around her, squeezing her lightly into a hug. She then felt something hard and cool pressed on top of her head. Naruto had swiftly hugged her from behind, resting his head on hers. Don't say that, Naruto said softly and gently into her hair. Hinata stiffened. I know in your eyes anything about me is your business. All this years I didn't realize it until an odd friend of mine showed it to me. I was a fool, nay? Naruto asked, chuckling softly. Hinata was now trembling in his embrace. Her hands gripped hard on her pants and tears silently fell from her now shut eyes to the arms that were holding her. I'm still a fool. Even though at this point I can't say I feel for you what you feel for me, at least I know I care for you as much as you do for me. After all, you are one of my precious friends, Naruto said, causing the girl to tremble harder in his hold. This time her grip was on his arms and her head tilted, also pressed on his arms. Besides, nothing happened yesterday. I know it looks suspicious, especially the way that Baka-sensei of mine wrote it to be, Naruto said with irritation. Hinata let out a sound which sounded like a twisted mix of sob and a chuckle. I know in the past I blatantly expressed my crush for Sakura-chan out in the open, but, OWW. What was that for? Naruto let out in pain. Hinata had bitten hard on his arm, though he still held on to her. Don't have to remind me. I'm frustrated enough as it is, Hinata mumbled into his sleeve. Naruto chuckled. Hi, Gomen. What I am trying to say is that I don't see her any differently than I see you, Hinata-chan, Naruto stated simply while saying her name in a musical manner. Hinata pressed her face even harder into his arm at hearing this. She was highly embarrassed at the newly added suffix to her name, but extremely delighted. Also at the fact of being placed on par with someone that he used to idolize so much. She released a bit of the pressure on his arm to say something in return. Even though this isn't the way I wished it would be, but I'm still happy, Hinata said before once again pressing her face into his arm out of embarrassment. He gave a light squeeze and smiled into her hair. Hinata could feel it, however now it sort of changed. You know, Hinata-chan, Naruto started once more musically. If you were jealous, you could spend the night here tonight, Naruto whispered teasingly. Hinata's eyes shot open. She stiffened as she heard and felt the words being whispered into her hair, and images exploded in her mind just as suddenly her eyes closed once more, her body relaxed and her head lolled to the side. Hinata-chan. There was no answer. After all, what can you expect out of the girl? Even though she has changed, Naruto holding her saying such things plus the possibly naughty thoughts that invaded her mind, the shock probably kicked in so fast there wasn't even time for a nosebleed. I did it again, didn't I? Naruto asked out loud to no one in particular, sighing. It's been hours since Hinata left his place. Naruto was slumped over the table, arms stretched out, looking like he was attempting to hug the dining table. In those few hours by himself he was trying to complete his report to the Hokage about his training, his travels, his progresses and his encounters. Although just 4 main points, having to report 3 years worth of those main points while successfully maintaining enough concentration to write neatly for those few hours exhausted him. He wasn't even halfway done, probably just slightly short. Groaning, he pushed himself up and a growl from his stomach echoed his own groans. Looking up at the clock on the wall, the time shown was 2:30. Lunch was definitely due. Deciding to take a break, he tidied up his table and grabbed his robe. Shrugging it on and straightening it without securing as always, he proceeded to the task of securing his swords. After all that is done and over with, he left his place heading straight to his favorite eating stall, Ichiraku. Looking at the place while he walked closer to it, he saw that it didn't look that much different outside. However, as he stepped in, the difference was there, and it was definitely in space. The place was a lot bigger. The counter was pushed further back now. There were circular tables and chairs for more people to dine. Although the restaurant now looking a little bare, it still looked as if it was doing well. The number of customers could be because it's way past lunch hour. Naruto's face lit up when his eyes rested upon a group of 4. A chubby person was waving enthusiastically at him while simultaneously eating his ramen. Another was just leaning back on a chair, arms crossed, looking at him as if the sight was going to knock him out to La La Land. The blonde girl in the group was gripping the table, looking at him with her mouth wide open, big enough that a fist could probably fit in. The last person in the group gave him a once-over with his eyes before blowing out a small cloud of smoke with a smile that had a cigarette hanging at the corner. "Hello Asuma-san, Shikamaru, Choji and Air Ino-san. Mind if I join you guys?" he asked politely. To this Asuma smiled wider, Shikamaru nodded nonchalantly, Choji nodded vigorously, still slurping noodles, and Ino, if possible, her jaw would have dropped further. Naruto pulled up a chair from another table and from where he approached them got himself seated between Asuma and Ino. The whole time he was aware that Ino's gaze hasn't left him, and together with that gaping mouth it was making him seriously uncomfortable. Giving her a side glance, he placed his hand under her chin and gently closed her mouth for her. "Ino-san, it's impolite enough to keep staring at someone, let alone with your mouth wide open like that," Naruto said again politely, though glee visible in his eyes. This definitely got her out of her stupor as she jerked back, breaking contact, and glared at him. Asuma burst out in laughter miraculously, his cigarette not dropping from his mouth. Shikamaru snickered. This earned a punch from the blonde girl. Shikamaru grunted and muttered something under his breath which Ino didn't miss. Ino punched him again and then turning sharply back at Naruto. "I bumped into Sakura earlier and I know she told me that you have changed quite a bit, but this," she exclaimed with her hand extended out, moving up and down as if displaying an alien to the rest. Rather than getting offended somehow, Naruto couldn't help but burst out in laughter at her reaction. The rest didn't seem bothered by it and just grinned. "Well, Ino-san, it has been 3 years. I'm sure plenty of things have changed about you guys. For example, those," Naruto said, pointed to the Chunin vests that Ino and Choji were wearing that was missing 3 years ago with a wide grin. Ino beamed proudly, patting her vest, and Choji took a look at his chest and smiled. "Yeah, Ino and I got those a year after you left. Actually, most of those from the Rookie 9, including Guy-san's team, got at that time," said Choji, setting down his chopstick, seeing that he was done. Following after Ino's example, patting his Chunin vest proudly. Though looking at Choji, Naruto noticed something was amiss. His smile twisted slightly after he said the second sentence. A thought entered Naruto's mind and he smiled sadly. "Yeah, most did. Choji. Sasuke died and I didn't see Sakura-chan wearing one, and there's me who just came back," Naruto said, chuckling sadly. Everyone's faces fell at his words and became very quiet, not really too sure what to say to him. "Yeah, I heard about it. I know Ba-chan told everyone not to tell me, but in the end she told me herself," he said. Choji now though looked at him with a stern expression. "That's not really what I meant," he said firmly. Naruto waved him off. "I know. I just wanted you guys to know that I already know, so you guys don't have to try to hide it from me. It was tough hearing it, but I already accepted it," Naruto explained. Choji frowned and shook his head slightly. What he meant was really very different from what Naruto perceived, however he didn't continue. Naruto shifted his gaze back at Ino. "You don't seem very upset with the news, Ino-san," Naruto said, keeping his voice light, not wanting to trigger anything off her. Ino. Call me that K. Not fair, you talk all casual with the rest and you get all stiff and formal with me. Ino huffed out in mock annoyance and punctuating that by crossing her arms sharply. Seriously, this surprised Naruto. Not only did Ino mention something totally different, but the fact that she actually wanted him to treat her like the rest when she wasn't exactly the nicest person to him kind of threw him off. Nevertheless, he accepted it and gave her a genuine smile. Hi Ino, Naruto said with an expectant look, wanting her to get back on topic. Ino noticed and sighed slightly. I'm guessing you expect me to be bawling all over him and stuff, huh? I am sad, don't get me wrong. However, Ino trailed off, and surprising Naruto once again, she broke into a wide grin. She then violently launched and attached herself to the person next to her. Shikamaru. Shikamaru jolted with his eyes bulging. Naruto burst out laughing. I swear that's the first time I have seen you so awake. Naruto exclaimed, sending everyone to join him in a bout of laughter. Well, except for Shikamaru, that is. He was grumbling. Che. I knew this was going to be troublesome, Shikamaru mumbled, typically closing his eyes. Shikamaru was expecting to get hit again, however it never came. Curiosity getting the better of him, he opened his eyes and looked at Ino. His eyes widened when he saw Ino, instead of giving him a good whack, was closing the distance with a pout. Kiss, kiss, Shika-kun, Ino said in a sugary sweet voice. Shikamaru jerked back, not too far, seeing Ino was still holding on to him with a vice grip. You got to be kidding me. Shikamaru gasped, aghast at what she was about to force him to do in front of his friends and sensei. Ino suddenly turned her head to look at Naruto again, grinning evilly. Isn't he so fun to tease? Ino asked. Naruto almost fell out of his chair laughing. Choji just chuckled, shaking his head, already used to the antics of his fellow teammates, and Asuma grinned. He always got a kick out of seeing Shikamaru caught off guard. Shikamaru, however, looked like he was going to mutter something else, but glancing at the girl next to him, he wisely refrained lest she pulled off a worse stunt. Must be the prankster's presence. This is so troublesome, the lazy genius sullenly thought. As all the laughter died down, Naruto looked at the man who has been quiet the entire time, watching them with amusement. Say, Asuma-san, they don't allow smoking here, do they? Naruto asked, looking curiously at the wisps of smoke forming a small smoke cloud over the man's head. Absolutely not. Naruto heard someone shout from behind the smoking man, followed by a loud pissed sound. Almost immediately the air smelled fresher. The smoking man jerked as another loud pissed was heard. Apparently his back just got sprayed. Ayame Onisan. Naruto exclaimed excitedly as he caught sight of the person walking up to them holding a spray can of air freshener. Beside her was an aged man. Oji-san. Naruto exclaimed once again. Oh my, if it isn't it, my number one customer, the old man said with a warm smile. The woman with the spray can blinked, looking at Naruto. Naruto-chan, she asked with a look of disbelief at the vastly different Naruto. Naruto's sweat dropped as he heard snickers coming from his peers. Nisan, I think I'm old enough for you to stop calling me that, Naruto said flatly. Ayame laughed behind her hand and stepped up next to him. She bent forward a little to the seated Naruto and ruffled his hair with a warm smile of her own. You will always be Naruto-chan to me despite how old you get. Ayame replied, saying his name in a sing-a-song manner. The snickers behind him just got louder. Naruto crossed his arms and pouted as Ayame continued ruffling his hair, knowing he can't do anything about it. Still as adorable, nay, she continued. This time instead of snickers, Naruto could hear the trio softly mimicking Ayame's voice. Naruto-chan is so adorable. Ah, isn't he cute? Naruto-chan. Naruto-chan. They kept going as Naruto flushed in embarrassment. There enough embarrassing the poor boy ya. The usual Naruto? The old man asked. Naruto's face lit up immediately. Hell yeah. Everyone laughed at the outburst. After bidding farewell to everyone once he consumed his lunch, he proceeded to the next thing on his agenda. Following the simple instructions given by Sakura, he didn't have any trouble finding the shop. A bell was heard as he opened the door to the shop, and immediately the first thing he saw were three familiar faces. Am I going to run into the whole world at every stop I make today? Naruto thought in amusement. Hey Kiba, Shino, he greeted the first two from the door. If it isn't the loudmouth idiot who disappeared for 3 years. It was quiet without ya, replied Kiba in jest, smirking, to which Naruto smirked back. Shino just nodded at him. Couldn't be. The village still has you, Naruto retorted, to which Kiba snorted. Looking past them, Naruto looked at the girl surprisingly behind the cashier's counter. Hey Tenten, Naruto greeted her. She just looked blankly at him and then turned away without saying anything. She then exited into a room behind and surprisingly leaving the counter empty with only the three of them in the main part of the shop without supervision. Naruto raised his eyebrows and looked at the two guys in askance. Long story. Gotta do with these, Kiba said, making a gesture flapping the vest that he was wearing over his regular clothes. Now that his attention was brought to that item, Naruto noticed that both of the guys were wearing Chunin vests. As usual, Shino didn't say anything. However, he looked as if he could be sporting a grimace on his face. He suddenly remembered what Choji mentioned earlier and the bothered tone he used. Actually, most of those from the Rookie 9, including Guy San's team, got at that time. That's not really what I meant. However, I ain't got the time to explain. Me and Shino here gotta meet up with Hinata at the Hyuga compound now for a training session with Hiyashi-sama, seeing that Kurenai-sensei's out on a mission. You probably should drop by if you have time. Hinata would like that, Kiba stated. I bumped into her in my apartment this morning, Naruto replied carelessly as his attention wasn't on Kiba or Shino. However, he was peering past them at the back room, or what he could see of it from the door left wide open. Kiba chuckled, looked at Naruto and glanced back at where the latter was looking. Well, we gotta be going. Don't ask Naruto, Kiba said firmly. Naruto glanced at Kiba for a sec before reverting. Kiba sighed and started walking, which got Shino moving as well. From the look on your face, I know you are going to. Stubborn as always. Ya know she'll turn you into a pin cushion with her kunai if you do so, Kiba said with a feral smile. He suddenly stopped and tilted his head to the side. With a soft whizzing sound, a kunai zipped past Kiba's head. Naruto, moving only his left arm, easily picked the kunai out from the air before it went past him. Even though accurate, it wasn't thrown with much effort. Guess she heard me, Kiba asked, looking at Shino. Shino nodded in reply and the both started walking again. As Kiba walked past Naruto, he placed a hand on his shoulder as a sign of farewell. Shino nodded to give a sign of similar fashion. Don't say I didn't warn ya, Kiba warned him once more. Catch you guys later, Naruto said absently. Not once his gaze left the doorway at the back of the room. Kiba nodded in acknowledgement and left the shop with Shino. As the bell was heard ringing again, signifying the closing of the door, Naruto made his way to the counter of the shop. Just as he reached the counter, Tenten's head popped out from the doorway at the back, staring at him using the corners of her eyes, the blank look she gave him earlier still there. Naruto stared back calmly and extended his hand that was still holding the kunai, ring end facing her. I believe this is yours, Naruto said softly. Tenten looked at the kunai and looked back at him, her expression not changing. She then came out fully, and from behind the counter she snatched it rudely from his hand, and in a blink it disappeared. Naruto briefly wondered how she did that. Now that she was in his view, he did note that she wasn't wearing a Chunin vest. Both of them locked eyes with each other in silence, not moving. Suddenly Tenten stuck her out at him as if asking him for something. Huh? Naruto asked, confused. Well, what is it that you want to buy? Seeing that you are in a shop. Give me the item, Tenten said in an edgy voice. Naruto was suddenly reminded of how most people in the village treated him. Did she somehow found out about my secret? Is that why she is treating me like this? But that doesn't make sense. Kiba said it's got to do with being a chunin. Even what Choji said implied that. What has that got to do with me? Hell, I'm still a goddamn genin. Well, technically at least, Naruto thought. Well, you buying anything or not? Tenten asked once again, her edgy voice now impatient. Well, not exactly. Then you can leave, she said curtly, interrupting whatever else Naruto had to say. From the time he returned, things refused to be easy for me, and now this really reminded him too much of how he was treated in the past. Naruto threw out all rational thought and banged his hands hard on the counter as his temper getting the better of him. What the hell is your goddamn problem? Naruto roared. Tenten flinched, however she didn't back down and continued to stare silently at him, her face now dark and stern. Naruto lifted up a hand and roughly pointed his index finger at her as if throwing a punch. I get enough of that shit from the adults. I definitely don't need it from someone around my age, especially when all I wanted was to ask a goddamned question. Naruto continued, arms shaking accusingly at her. Tenten narrowed her eyes at him. You already did ask and I'm not about to answer. I don't know what the hell you are talking about, the adults, but it has nothing to do with them. Now leave, Tenten replied in a controlled voice. Naruto was taken aback by the statement. Shit. If this has nothing to do with the adults, then high chances are it's really gotta do with the chunin rank. I almost blew it because I didn't keep my temper in check. I'm so getting my handed to Kyuubi for that. Oh crap. What the am I thinking putting it that way? Now I'm never going to hear the end of it, Naruto panicking in his head as he heard a rumbling laugh from the back of his mind. Shaking out his thought, he took a deep breath as he straightened himself to calm down. He held her intense gaze once more. Che. That wasn't even the question I initially wanted to ask. If so, I wouldn't have looked for you in a shop which I didn't even know you were working in, Naruto said grudgingly, a lot calmer but still ticked off. Now it was Tenten's turn to be taken aback. It just became obvious that they both have misunderstood each other. Realizing this, Tenten's expression reverted back to the blank look she had on earlier. The shop belongs to my parents. I just happened to help out today because they are busy with stuff out of town. Ask. Tenten said, her voice has lost its edginess, however it still sounded clipped. I was mentioning to Sakura-chan that I needed to customize something this morning and she directed me here, seeing I haven't been around in 3 years. So I came to ask if you guys do such a service, Naruto said evenly now. Customized weapons? Tenten asked with a raised brow. Yeah. Well, not exactly. I already have the weapon. It's a projectile actually, so what I'm wondering is if you guys could replicate it, since I might be needing more of it and many places I went couldn't, Naruto answered. Let's see it, Tenten said, extending her hand once more. Naruto bent to the side a little bit and dug around in his weapon holster. Because he didn't really leave his sight of her, Naruto noticed that Tenten's gaze trailed down initially towards his weapon holster. However, she caught sight of something else and she shifted her gaze to his other side, where she locked onto his pair of swords. He could have sworn something lit up in her eyes. Now, because her eyes were locked on his swords, Tenten didn't notice that Naruto already pulled out the said projectile and placed it in her extended hand. There you go, he said. Blinking at hearing his words and the sudden feeling of cool metal in her hand, she looked down at what was in her possession. Her eyes widened and she slipped her finger in the ring and lifted it close to her face, turning around at different angles to inspect at the finer details of the 3-pointed kunai. Suddenly she grabbed the kunai by its handle and thrusted it out at Naruto, stopping just inches away from his face. Naruto didn't flinch, but he once again narrowed his eyes at her, anger starting to resurface. Tenten was mirroring him in expression. "Where did you get this?" Tenten asked, the edgy voice returning. "It was a gift," Naruto replied with the same edginess. "From whom?" "I'm not about to answer," Naruto quoted with a sneer. Tenten's arm shook. "From whom?" she repeated. Her voice's edge has taken on a layer of venom. Naruto could feel himself being lured into the emotional trap, which will result in him ending up exploding once more. Naruto closed his eyes, and once he reopened his eyes, his features has smoothed out. However, his clarity and intensity in his eyes increased. He directed it straight into Tenten's eyes. "I don't know what your problem is with me, nor at this point do I care for the reason behind it. However, I refuse to answer to the person who points at me the weapon I handed over out of goodwill. So you take that weapon and stab it right through my head, as you will not receive a single hint of the answer from me," Naruto replied. His voice quiet and controlled. Tenten's arm shook violently at his words, and as suddenly as she threatened the use of the weapon at him, she brought it down, averting her eyes away from him with clear effort visible. "I'm sorry," she said. For the first time her voice came out soft. "Why do you insist on knowing?" Naruto asked, his voice softening as well, however still keeping his eyes on her. "Because every single one of these were crafted by my parents' very own hands," Tenten replied absently as she kept her gaze at the weapon in her hand. "I see. I cannot tell you, but I assure you neither myself nor the person who gave it to me acquired it through dishonest means," Naruto said honestly. Tenten's head shot up. "How can that be possible? My parents crafted those for only one person, and that person is dead." Tenten exclaimed, this time her disbelief not holding any resentment as she locked her eyes on Naruto again. Naruto shrugged. He turned around, breaking eye contact. "Please keep that safely and show it to your parents once they return. Also kindly request for me that I wish to discuss replicating those. I will come back in a few days, all right?" Naruto said without turning back. Without waiting for answer as well, he started to make his way out of the shop. "Naruto, wait. I still have a few more questions," Tenten called out. Naruto stopped and looked over his shoulder with his eyebrows raised. "Pretty demanding, don't you think? Especially after the way you treated me today?" Naruto asked playfully with a smirk on his face. "Please, I'm already putting aside whatever it is that is bothering me," Tenten pleaded. "Fine, but you have accept the fact that I won't be able to answer some questions without speaking to your parents first," Naruto agreed hesitantly. "Thank you. Firstly, how many of these do you have?" Tenten asked, holding up the 3-point kunai. "3. Though one is currently with Sakura-chan as a gift from me, partly because I constantly worry about her," Naruto answered. "Alright. That would automatically lead to the next question I had in mind. Does that mean you can execute the jutsu bound with this kunai?" Naruto looked down in thought. He bit his lip, wondering whether he should answer that. Looking up, he answered, "Yes. Another impossibility from what I have been told about these." "How?" Tenten asked, confusion starting to show. To this Naruto shrugged. Tenten took that as a sign which said, "Next question please." "Fine. If you have these in your possession," Tenten trailed off. She flipped the 3-pointed kunai and expertly caught it by the broad side of its sharp blade in the middle, using her fingertips avoiding getting cut. She then thrusted her hand out once more, only this time pointing it using the ring end and at Naruto's waist. "Are those swords what I think they are?" "Which is what?" Naruto asked in return with a quirk of an eyebrow. "Hanu no Ishi, Will of the Flame," answered Tenten. Naruto chuckled in amusement. "For you to know that name, your parents must have had a hand at creating those pair of swords," Naruto said in delight. "So is that a yes?" "Who knows? Anyway, enough questions for today. I have other things to do like nasty reports, said Naruto shuddering at the last few words. That is the last I'll ask. I know you know. Naruto walked a few more steps and gave her a sidelong glance. He placed his left hand on the sheath of his katana under the guard of the sword. With a flick of his thumb, a very small portion of the matte blade was exposed, showing hints of kanji etched on it for a moment. The moment passed when Naruto's right palm pressed on the end of the sword, shutting the glimpse out with a soft click. Naruto grinned at Tenten's expression. She was looking like a perfect imitation of Ino earlier today.